Awesome. So glad to have you on here, Harvey. We just came off a heck of a week at NRF. So how was your trip back?
Trip back was relatively seamless, although it seemed like I flew in a city bus from Newark back to Denver, as they flew a Dreamliner for some reason on that route. It was crazy.
That's nuts. Maybe overkill for the router, no?
It was full, and it was nice to fly a Dreamliner that way for sure. But yeah, you don't get that experience domestically very often anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Well, with that trip back, I think a good place to start is NRF. I mean, Sunday through Tuesday. Looks like you made some trips around New York City. You took home your favorite babka. Visited New York's largest cheese section. Maybe any discussion about that to start with?
A couple of things. One, I guess I'll start with the stuff in my belly. I definitely made a purpose of having dessert every night. Members of my team enjoyed it. We started with serendipity, and that was kind of fun and maybe a bit overrated but nothing wrong with a banana split at 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
Found some very cool wine and dessert bar where we had some espresso martinis and chocolate fondue, and then walked around the Ironbound district looking for gelato on the last night before I left. So lots of dessert. It was really great. Obviously, my trip up to Zabar's, those that know me know they were the original launch customer with Demandware. I used to work for a retail business on the Upper West Side. I used to date a girl who actually lived around the corner from Zabar. So they've been a part of my life for a long time. So bringing a babka home to my wife was really important. But the show itself, I guess I'll start with a wow. I've been to NRF the last couple of years, and obviously the last couple of years have been a little bit less than enthusiastic. But even leading up to the last couple of years, if for those of us that have been around for quite some time, the shop.org time, we loved the shop.org environment. And then when, the shop.org NRF kind of civil war was happening, it really took the wind out of the sails of that side of our space. And I don't think NRF did a really good job of representing the core DNA of NRF, of shop.org in the NRF space. But I can say that the shop.org DNA, culture, values, mojo is back. That show felt a lot like the shop.org events as far as the drive for innovation, the enthusiasm, the forward-looking stance of so many of the vendors, and the positive outlook for what can happen with investment by the buying community. So super excited, on both sides of the fence, like both on the DMZ side and the non-DMZ side of the pass holders. So I think it's exciting times are at our front door again.
No, I think it's interesting. I spent a lot of time, growing up in the space. I used to go to 2 shows every year for sure, Internet Retailer and shop.org. Those were always sort of the 2 bookended shows, especially before the retail season. It seems like it keeps creeping earlier and earlier. They used to do a great job with shop.org. It was kind of like the e-com digital show that was a little bit more elevated than IRC, which seems like it was for the masses. And then NRF for years and years has been mostly about stores. And then I think it feels like in the last 3 years, probably with the help of COVID, the digital commerce aspects have really come to the forefront. And then the kind of, I would say, this unified commerce vision has really made kind of the shift between stores and digital kind of a seamless one, which is to the benefit of the show, because I think it reflects what retailers and brands are looking for when they're talking about the consumer experience.
Yeah, I think it's spot on, right? The core of retail has been digitized, right? For lack of better words.
Yeah, no, I think it's exciting. I saw obviously a couple of platforms that were getting into stores. I saw a couple of platforms that were kind of getting out of that business and kind of going more in the OMS direction. We definitely saw a lot of stores and security solutions, some marketing and merchandising solutions in the innovation lounge. Is any other booths or presentations or stand out to you at the show?
So there's a couple things. I think one, the presence of, and I'm sure they've been there in the past, you just didn't notice them, right? But the businesses like Verizon and T-Mobile, like the actual purveyors of the mobility of data transformation, right? And how critical they are to the process, the fact that they're so present and there and engaged in this, traditional application show was really cool. I won't mention them by name, but I've been a big fan of, let's call it the precursor to AI, so machine learning or big databases where you put algorithms on top of them, in the merchandising space for probably 10 years. Right. I always thought that the whole concept of what retailers buy, how they allocate, how they forecast and budget could be so enhanced if it wasn't about the person sitting at a spreadsheet knowing what the weather was, knowing when it snowed and a truck did or didn't get to a store and either they were out of stock or not out of stock, when a port strike happened or didn't happen, which slowed the things of goods, when someone made a bet on a color and that was a bad color, even though style was really good. And so it's really cool to see some of the technology vendors in that space that have been trying to do it for a long time finally have the world catch up to it, right? And, merchants and CIOs, CFOs really leaning in heavy in that space because, my last role, I was still a retail operator, right? Like in 2022, 2021, 2020, I was successful whether or not I had the right product at the right price at the right time, in the right color and the right size. It had not, I don't say it had nothing to do with all the stuff I love around consumer experience and digital, but all of that stuff didn't matter if the swatch was out of stock.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Look, I've said in the past, and I continue to believe it, availability is marketing. So if you're out of stock, then everything goes to hell in a handbasket pretty quickly for your forecasts, particularly for your top 100 SKUs. Yep. Wanted to keep the conversation going with regards to kind of the platform wars that have been going on. Obviously, you and I have both been in the space for a long time, kind of going back to ATG and WebSphere and Magento. And it seems like the world has been transitioning such that a lot of the newer brands that are sort of created from scratch and growing up are started on Shopify these days. Yet still I would say there's a vintage number of demandware brands that have made the transition over, but Salesforce still has thousands of customers, of which continue to persist on the platform because not everyone wants to re-platform every day. Obviously, it's very expensive, it's very time consuming, and the ROI isn't always easy to prove. As much as you want to say about what Shopify is doing and how their market cap has sort of come from nowhere in the last 7 years, there's several thousand Salesforce customers right now. And if we get to the end of 2025, there's still going to be several thousand legacy, whatever word you want to use for it, legacy Salesforce Commerce Cloud Demandware customers that are still going to be there.
Yep. You used a very important, interesting term, obviously, around, warfare, and it does seem like warfare, and it seems like, at least if you look at the earned media space, it wasn't really even, it was a blitzkrieg, for a lack of better words, right? Like it was one side went in and the other side didn't necessarily react or realize until it had happened.
Right.
And clearly that has set some degree of perception of reality, but it's not really reality. The reality is a much more balanced perspective. Mm-hmm. The two platforms come at the problem with very different mindsets and serving very different businesses at their core, right? And having been at Demandware very early on, when we honestly recognized the inappropriate fit of our product for SMBs and owner-operated businesses,
right.
Like it's not surprising that someone was created and created an amazing business. Obviously, what no one knew at the time was how this whole creator economy would be both facilitated by that technology and be in position to take advantage of it as it happened. It's not like Shopify created TikTok, right?
Right.
So what's also clear is that what makes Demandware, Salesforce, Commerce Cloud, B2C, whatever term you want to use, its thing is a degree of control, a degree of integration that is not native to the way Shopify operates. And there are, in fact, businesses who don't benefit by giving those things up. Mm-hmm. Right. And I'll say a bunch of words, right? And they'll mean something to people who actually get it. When I say SOC 2 compliance, when I say separation of duties, when I say source control or change control, like in a Shopify ecosystem, those words now have to be addressed. But
right.
I don't know what their market cap is. You probably do, right? But whatever billions of dollars it is,
I think
right?
80 billion last I checked,
right?
or something like
they're
that.
Irrelevant terms in sales processes.
Right.
And so now they're relevant terms, and it's not a simple answer. It's not a, we got an app for that. So I am more pragmatic. Our business at Red Band is a little bit more slow in its transformation. And at the end of the day, there's going to be room for everyone. And at the end of the day, as some of you are probably starting to see, I just got out of a Salesforce advisory board meeting, like the Giants waking up a little bit and defending their turf and making more concrete statements, maybe not externally yet, but internally into their trusted folks that they haven't been making in the last 2 or 3 years about the threats, challenges, and opportunities.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting time because one thing I've been poking Shopify about for the last couple of years is the staging. Here's another thing, staging environment outside of this world. That it doesn't mean anything to anyone except if you require a place for your IT to verify what's going to go live before it goes live. I mean, Shopify's approach to enterprises, you're not going to need it. Kind of your famous developer Yagni, which is sort of built in the agile mindset. And once you get above a certain size, again, some things like compliance, you are going to need it. And so I think that's a tension that they have that Salesforce doesn't have. On the direct consumer side, it's hard for me to see tons of new people going there. But on the B2B side, enterprise CRM is owned by Salesforce, period. Full stop. And so Salesforce B2B commerce solution is built on top of that. So to the extent that you have a company in that situation, it's hard to argue with that as a solution for those sorts of businesses.
Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting underlying synergy going on here, right? So Shopify obviously pivoting their D2C solution to B2B, right? And I know you had your takes on that. And Salesforce, in essence, I don't want to say re-architecting, it's not the right word, but re-establishing their commerce footprint, right? The introduction of D2C, which everyone knows is Commerce on Core, and the repositioning of B2B, which is also Commerce on Core, and then changing a bunch of the underlying architectural ways they deliver those experiences so that D2C and B2B are much the same thing, operating on Commerce on Core. So now you've got Shopify competing on one platform for D2C and B2B. You've got Salesforce now trying to compete on one platform for D2C and B2B. Salesforce having a huge leg up in the enterprise and CRM and all those other spaces with that, but clearly the slow follower on the commerce side. Like it's going to be interesting, and it's not going to be solved in one cycle, and it's not going to be solved in press releases. And it's ultimately going to be determined by stock prices, and I don't think it's going to be a winner take all.
Yeah, it's definitely not going to be a winner take all. Number one is investors and CEOs don't like to re-platform for no reason, particularly above a certain size. But I do think there is a game afoot in Demandware sites that were built 10 to 15 years ago that are in kind of that site genesis controllers era where Salesforce was, Demandware was going through a lot of re-architecture, and then people are feeling limitations. Salesforce is trying to come up, most of these, not even to like step the conversation back from Shopify specifically. No platform is going to buy a customer out of their other platform contract. And so number one, those contracts need to end. Second, there's usually a payment process for contract involved, especially if there are stores. Those rates are usually quite good. And I think we have not yet seen Shopify sort of POS rates rise to the level of Fiserv or Adyen, corporate enterprise, or Braintree, these sorts of names that have been in the enterprise space for 20 plus years in many cases. Those are the things that I think Shopify needs to reckon with as it kind of goes forward too.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm a big solutionist in the, let's call it the token space, right? And there's a pretty challenging and interesting approaches as it relates to just the ownership and ability to transact on that token from various applications that are core and fundamental. And yeah, but the site genesis problem, opportunity, depending on the day of the week, right?
Yeah.
Is still there in most of its material form. Yes, there's been some attrition and whatnot, but it's still there. You made a comment the other day. The end of the day, the CFOs are much more involved and they don't believe anything anybody says anymore. And I think we got into some of that, in the basement over cocktails the other night. It's for those of us, I want to say more on the operation side and maybe on the demand gen side. It's kind of been a breath of fresh air that the CFOs have been more involved because it's slowing decision-making down. It's making it more pragmatic. It's not trusting the model. It's more of it's creating the discipline around the verification of the model after part 1 before part 2, 3, and 4 are funded.
Yeah, no, I think that's well put because the CFO has definitely entered the chat and they're a little bit angry at being passed over in the past. And so I think this time they're not only demanding proof, they're demanding like trial periods. They're, demanding alternatives is the option. Is this the only other way to solve our problem? Is that in fact the case? And so I think they're pushing their vendors harder than ever before. You mentioned cocktails in the basement, of course, referring to our RMW Commerce event ahead of NRF. We were blessed to have you guys as a sponsor and in the room with us. What were some of the themes that you see coming out of that event for your audience as we look to 2025?
One, the importance of trust and networks, first and foremost. 2 is the uncertainty and need to prove it, right? And not just prove it once, prove it on a continuous and ongoing basis. But 3, and probably the most important, is sitting on the sidelines isn't going to work in the next 2 years. Like you're going to have to make some decisions and some calculated bets and do your work to de-risk. But if you wait much longer, there are really powerful, really consumer influencing creator brands, right? Owner operated brands, disruptors in every category that are looking to not just take your customer, but to take your customer and your competitor customer and do business with them in a different way. That will make it really hard for you to come back to your legacy way of doing business through distributors, third parties, all kinds of other various channeling.
Yeah, I think ongoing proof and sitting on the sidelines, those are good things that we should, dive into in the future, even after this call. One of the things we talk a lot about here at RMW is you have to make a bet. Ultimately, the biggest question on the minds of CEOs and chief digital officers is like, what can I do to grow more? Why aren't I hitting my plan? Or how can I make my plan more efficiently? At some point, spreading your bets too thin hamstrings you because you're not leaning in to your biggest growth opportunities. And you're trying to, a lot of times people are trying to hedge their bets based on what is comfortable to them, what they know from the past, and not necessarily throwing the ball down the field and betting on the future and really leaning into new markets, leaning into their brand marketing, as opposed to retargeting their same old customers and expecting that to grow the business when all that does is reintroduce yourself to someone who, went to your website last week. Or
the worst case, right? Make you pay for a transaction that you would have otherwise had the privilege of getting.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of the old, it's almost like there seems to be this interesting view, and I'd love to get your take on it, that not that retargeting is becoming less useful, but it's becoming like the old affiliate scam. Like you like spend a lot of dollars and you're like, hey, we take credit for all these sales. I'm like, sorry, this is not, first of all, this is not true. We wouldn't attribute it to you, but second, it's also not incremental.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I've had the privilege, honor, right, of holding a P&L for an omnichannel, multi-channel, whatever you call it, traditional retailer. I've had the privilege of providing technology services to a global brand of competing in marketplaces, wholesale, direct e-com, their own retail. Like, I've had some interesting experiences, and the more time you spend justifying every single incremental dollar of marketing and looking at it at a transactional level and not at an outcome level, the more likely you are to not actually achieve the goals and objectives you're trying to achieve. The more trust there is, the more focus there is on measure the outcome afterwards, and not the KPIs to get to the outcome. The more you'll succeed. The challenge that takes is it requires risk taking, right? It requires good data and confidence, but it also requires the willingness to be wrong and pivot. And that's where things get all messed up, right? There's so many environments and ecosystems and companies, leadership teams, whatever, where the willingness to be wrong has been lost. And so risk isn't taken, those throw the ball down the field. I mean, it's football analogy, right? Like, throw the ball down, your completion rate is lower, but man, when you complete it, right, you gain a heck of a lot of yards, and it's a really efficient process. And it's really, really similar.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great way to wrap us, which is 2025 is the year to make a bet. And if you're afraid to make a bet, then you need to be satisfied with the results, which is stagnation.
Truth.
So no one wants to stagnate. And so I really appreciate the time. Definitely appreciate your support of the event and look forward to doing more together in the future.
Same here. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.